It's nice to see so many friendly faces and friends here. And Jen, I just want to say that never before have we received so many questions in advance. So people are intrigued by you, they're intrigued by Baxter, so welcome, and let me get out my note cards.
Awesome, thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, so glad that you could be with us. So before we dive into your reign as president, class president at Edward Little High School, which you know I'm obsessed with since I did lose 2 out of the 4 elections at Stoneham High School. It's still very raw for me. I want to know your strategy, but give us the Baxter overview, just in terms of the company and.
Yeah, so Baxter was established in 2011, January of 2011. So we'll be coming up on our 12-year anniversary. At that time, we were the 16th brewery to be licensed. So a lot of people think of us as much older than we are because of the familiarity with Stowaway IPA, which was a West Coast IPA, and our first beer that we ever released. What made it unique was that people weren't getting West Coast IPAs fresh at that point. They were, they needed to come in from the West Coast in most cases. And Luke, the founder, really came onto the scene with this idea that we were going to do what we can and can what we do and be an all-can brewery, which was our tagline at that time, and was pretty progressive in this world of bottles and competition of much bigger breweries, and glass really being kind of the typical. Now, it's all cans all the time, but yeah, so we did 4,000 barrels in the very first year, which was really unique, the first time that had ever been done, and it was almost all driven by the demand for Stowaway. Now, almost 12 years later, there's 176 breweries, and on your average main craft brewery is doing around 800 to 1,000 barrels a year. We just had our last year in 2021 of 18,000 barrels, and we're third or fourth probably biggest brewery at this point, still located in Lewiston in the mill, and have really expanded our lineup, well beyond Stowaway. But Stowaway is still our tried and true flagship beer. Just as I became president in 2019, we had 100,000 barrels produced at that point, and we've produced another 20,000+ of just Stowaway. So it's a very dedicated drinker. We're very appreciative of the Stowaway drinkers.
How many people have tried Baxter's products before? So we have basically 100% market share, which is fantastic. We did talk about doing this at 4 o'clock, but this is probably more responsible and professional. So
yes,
well, we will stick with that. But the beer scene in Maine has obviously exploded. What did you say, from 16 to 100 and?
Yeah, we were the 16th to be licensed, and then there's 176 now. I mean, that was the last count. I don't look it up daily, which does change daily. So, but no, it's an incredible industry to be a part of. But the competition's far different, and it's definitely one of the #1 tourist reasons that people come to the state of Maine. Our food, obviously, everybody knows we're spoiled, and the craft beer scene is, kind of top 1 and 2 reasons. So
for sure,
proud to be a part of that, for sure.
So, like Baxter, you were a local product. So you grew up in Auburn.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So tell us about it. Seriously, she was class president for 4 years. And I just want to know what your strategies were to win, but more importantly, I think it just speaks to your leadership, right? That you knew at a young age that you wanted to be in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, probably my mom would agree with that sentiment. Yeah, I was really into being active, and I wasn't really one to complain about a situation. I wanted to help impact the situation. I wanted our class to be the wealthiest class to ever graduate. I wanted a big class trip. I wanted to give back to the school. I wanted to be a part of the solution and help make a difference. And the memory of when you're 14 and what you're thinking about is a little different when you're 36. So I asked my mom about it. She was like, well, you weren't a spectator. You just didn't watch things. You just had to do all things. And then Adam Platts, who's the founder of Baxter Outdoors and a lifelong friend of mine, he was like, well, I think it's because you had an hour. So you had an hour available, and you were like, let's fill that hour. So, depending on who you're talking to. But yeah, it was a really rewarding experience. And I didn't know that I'd be president again in any capacity, but there's a couple of high school friends that really get a kick out of the fact that they've been calling me Prez for much longer than I've been president of a company, so.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, the mega bottle drive that you did in 2002 is still something that they do today, right?
Yeah, so one of our plans were so it was really like the power of a nickel, and this idea that we wanted to recycle. So we put boxes into every classroom, and after every basketball game and every football game, we would go and clean up the bleachers and take every bottle and put them in for recycling. So Steve Roop, who from Rooper's Beverage, who just recently passed, actually has known me my whole life. And I didn't have a license, so we would bring truckloads of bags of bottles. And he was like, where are you bringing these? Like, how are you getting all these bottles? But it was a slow accumulation over all 4 years. So when we graduated high school, the classes all debated on who got the bottles, and the principals had to determine that it had to go to the senior class because it accumulated so much money. So we reigned it for 4 years, and then it was a big reason why we went to the Bahamas, and we whitewater rafted, and sending 58 18-year-olds to the Bahamas is questionable.
That's a lot of bottles. That's a lot of bottles. And you were also an athlete. We were talking about you played field hockey and faced the powerhouse at Skowhegan that still rules today in field hockey.
Yep.
But what lessons did you learn as a high school athlete that are really important today?
Well, I think, between field hockey and softball and the demands of playing on the off seasons, also, time management, I think camaraderie, teamwork, how to get a lot done in a little amount of time when you're on a bus with a headlamp and trying to excel at school as well. I think it translates to a lot of things outside of the business as well. I think it's why I founded a lot of friendships at that point that I still have to this day. And if you're competitive, like, it kind of just stays with you. Definitely. You like to win. And
what was your first paying job? Because you were super busy.
Yeah,
like before you went to college. Did you deliver the Sun Journal or no?
No.
You were just in it like every day.
No, I worked at a nursing home in 5th grade, and like 5th, 6th, 7th, I got a worker's permit, and I couldn't remember if I ever got paid for that, but I think the first job I had before I had a license was at Porches, which, if you don't know Porches, it was once in the Auburn Mall. If you haven't been to the Auburn Mall, there's some great memes about the Auburn Mall. But yeah, it was a department store, an older department store, before my days at JCPenney.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you leave Auburn and you go to college. Where did you go and what did you study?
I went to Hobart and William Smith in Geneva, New York. So on the Finger Lakes in Geneva, just between Syracuse and Rochester. And I studied economics and sociology.
And one of the key things for you when you were in school was an internship that you did at Cintas, right?
Yes, yeah.
So tell us about that.
We had a really great career services program, and the person that ran career services encouraged me to. My sophomore year, I got my real estate license and lived in Boston because I wanted to see if I liked it. Like, I was an odd person, obviously. My freshman year, that summer, I worked for Fastenal, which is an industrial supply store. My sophomore year, I got a real estate license and sold real estate. Turns out, like, when you're doing apartment real estate, some of the checks come later, once people move in. All of that money, I don't know where that went. I mean, it went to Geneva, New York, somewhere. And then junior year, I worked for Cintas, which was a facility services company in Syracuse. And there's a huge casino in Utica, New York. And that location pretty much was founded to support the uniform services of the casino, but it had never made $1 of profit. So I came in under a scholar internship program. So they had me doing customer service, rerouting drivers, organizing the back, repairs, cleaning, kind of all in. And when I came back to talk about that experience and what I was gonna do now in my real career, the person from Career Services was like, you're talking about operations. Because we didn't have a business degree at Hobart, and it's one of the reasons I almost transferred, because I knew I wanted to be in the business world. And So they said, if you're going to do operations and you love operations, you've got to work for Pepsi. There's nowhere else to work. And so I applied my senior year to Pepsi. And my birthday is November 16th. I got my job offer on my birthday senior year, and I had a great year. So, the security of that. And I love operations, actually. Recently, some of my newer staff was asking me about manufacturing, and I just was like, I just love manufacturing. And I know like that's a geeky, weird thing to say or whatever, but I just do. It's definitely fuels me to this day. And I'm fortunate that I came across what my career was at that age, for sure.
And so, I mean, you really got a lot of experience at Pepsi and some challenges.
Yeah.
They're working overnights and...
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate. I started in the internship, or they call it campus hire program. So I got 90 days to see all sides of the business. And then I started as a warehouse supervisor in a union plant. And at that particular location in Latham, New York, which is right outside of Albany, they had never had a female last more than a year. And so it was like, oh, well, she was lazy and she was this and it's like, do you really think that? So here I am, like 22 years old, being like, so tell me, like, all of these women over 20 years' time, it was all about them, not about the culture that's here. That's interesting. And like posing that question at 22 to a group of people that worked for me, and their average tenure was 17 years with Pepsi, was a challenge, but it definitely shaped so much of who I am and my career and what I've been able to accomplish, and the pride that those initial teams I have in my career now, and the messages I get when things happen here in Maine.
Do they take credit for it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In a very supportive, wonderful way, but yeah, they're like, if we wouldn't have run you through the ringer at 2 a.m, because there was a union plant, so there's a lot of like. There was rules around you had to post for overtime by a certain time, so like the union steward would come and block you from posting the list, so then they wouldn't have to stay, and then you'd have to convince each individual to stay, and yeah. So once you learn the game, you can figure out how to play it. So
Yeah. So you always knew though that you wanted to come back to Maine. I mean, you are the live and work in Maine boomerang, right?
Yeah.
So how'd you get back here?
So I came back when I started networking a little bit and trying to understand. I knew I wanted to be in manufacturing or operations of some sort, and so I started reaching out to folks just to have conversations. I loved what I was doing with Pepsi, but the only way to really get back to Maine would be to come in a safety role and a headquarters position. And I liked being on the ground floor. I liked the frontline interaction, and I didn't love the idea of headquarters. And while safety's wildly critical, it's kind of like working in quality, which is very important, but you kind of only have bad news. Like I'm gonna make your life more inconvenient. So I wasn't really into making my career about that. And a vegetable processing company called Curran's was in Biddeford, or Saco at the time, and they reached out and they asked me about how to implement food safety. And so we kind of went back and forth, and I helped consult for a little bit, and then came up and worked there, implemented food safety, and grew that business. And we moved to the Biddeford Industrial Park, and Green Giant actually bought the company, and that's why I left in 2017.
And so then you made the connection at Baxter. Is that how?
Yeah, so the financier of Baxter owned the vegetable processing company. So he, from my procurement experience in operations and manufacturing, the plan was to start a consulting LLC and start to try to expand beyond high-speed manufacturing of cans and bottles, and then fresh cut vegetables, which was a completely different challenge. And so I was gonna do a little bit of consulting and see where else I could network. And then I learned about myself that I don't really do things part way. So I very quickly was there all the time and helping, and became the operations director and within a couple months' time, so.
And then you transitioned to president.
Yep, in 2019, so 2 years later.
So you talked about barrel production.
Yep.
So how do you, other than barrel production, how do you measure how you're doing at Baxter? What are the metrics or the things that you look at with the staff to say like, yeah, we're on track?
So, I mean, out of stocks is obviously a huge part of our business. If you go to the grocery store and you go to pick up a Stowaway 12-pack and it's not there, you're not going to say, well, I'm not going to drink for this barbecue. I'll come back. I'll wait until Stowaway is back in production. So being in stock and available is a huge part of our ethos. It's a huge part of our brand. We want to be accessible. We want to be economically friendly. We want to be a beer option to convert you from your Bud Light 30-pack and not break the bank. So out of stocks, of course, are a huge pillar and driver for us, but internally we instituted 4 pillars that drive everything that we do. We make our decisions, our priorities based on those pillars. So first is personnel safety, second is food safety, third is quality experience. So ensuring that if you're opening a can in Fort Kent, it's the same as if you're opening it in Boston or drinking it on draft. That's inclusive of a lot of other things as well. And then continuous improvement, this idea of always improving upon whatever we're doing. Within those pillars, within our culture, within programs, within employee benefits, and we track and measure those and results and go over those each month in our staff meetings.
Great. So, all right, here come the questions from the audience that I attempted to work in. So Robert Duvall of Keystone Property Group asked, what percentage of your business is wholesale versus retail? Do you self-distribute? So just talk a little bit about the distribution operation.
Yep. So in the state of Maine, when we signed with distribution, we signed with distribution in year 1. You couldn't make over 1,600 barrels a year and self-distribute. So we were really never on the table of being self-distributed. So we've always been with our partners in Maine. So we do Nappy in the southern part of Maine and then Pine State in the northern part of Maine. So if you're in a restaurant or an off-premise location or Hannaford, that beer went to either of those 2 distributors and then out to the market. And from a percentage standpoint, at this point, historically pre-COVID, we were about 25% on-premise and 75% off-premise. So off-premise can be anything. That could be the can that you buy at Irving, it could be Hannaford, it could be anywhere you purchase it. During COVID, we had to obviously lean into the off-premise segment because we all weren't out at bars and restaurants. And so we ended up almost flat that year. So at this point now, we've not only recovered that 25%, but we've grown our on-premise business significantly. So we should end this year around 32 to 35% of on-premise consumption, and the rest will be off-premise. So both segments are incredibly important. There's a lot of debate within the industry and within different breweries of where's your push and your pull. Is it that we went down to Boone's and we had Staycation Land and that makes me go look for it in the market? Or is it the familiarity that we saw it out at the grocery store, or we saw it at our friend's barbecue in a can, and I recognize that name on draft. So I think the fact of the matter is it happens both ways. It depends. But for tourism particularly, people are often coming, spending time at restaurants, and then hopefully taking beer with them out of state. So that on-premise piece and the growth that we've seen, particularly in the Bar Harbor and Booth Bay areas, have been really critical for us. And but both segments are very, very important for sure.
So speaking of cans, Chris Newell had a question. Where do the ideas come from for new beers and their graphics? So talk a little bit about the process for designing cans, naming beers. That must be fun.
Yeah. Actually, there's someone in the audience that could speak to this a bit, a friend of mine that has helped us with naming beers on a handful of occasions. It really is dependent. I thought a lot about this question because I didn't want to bore people, but sometimes it's a beer we know Lager Road for specifically. Like we knew we wanted to do a light lager. We wanted to give the sales team something to go out into the world to offer on-premise locations an alternative to your Bud Light, your Mick Ultra, your corn-based American lagers that would give them an opportunity to lean into being produced here in Maine. Employees from Maine, the production's in Maine, and so we knew that what we wanted from a style standpoint, and then built the brand off of that style. Whereas Cadence, we knew we wanted a session IPA. We knew what we wanted to say about that rhythmatically we wanted people to drink it and be able to drink more than one to replace that stowaway drinker that's once I have 3, things get weird. So we wanted something to be approachable, and so that kind of the name came after brainstorming up at Sugarloaf, and a friend suggested it. Whereas Lager Road was established by our team. Staycation Land, we got a lot of credit for saying that we created it because of COVID, when in fact it came out on February 29th, and we had to make those decisions in 2019. But people were like, oh, it's amazing, you're celebrating COVID in a whole different way. And
Yes,
it's like, if that's your experience with it, I'm not gonna take that from you, but I'm certainly not gonna be dishonest. And then sometimes there's great names. So Coastal Haze is an example of, it's just a great name. It's a great name for Maine, it's a great name for beer, the movement of hazy IPAs. We had first used and trademarked the name around a Hefeweizen beer in 2015. And so we continued to keep the trademark on that name because it's just a great name. And so we knew we wanted the name. We knew where I wanted the style and the ABV to be. We wanted it hazy. We wanted to round out our variety pack to offer. When people purchase our variety pack, we've got 2 light lagers, we've got a heavy hitting stowaway, and we needed something in the middle. We wanted it to be hazy. You want to show up to the barbecue with something for everyone, not one beer that's kind of left over, which was historically one of our issues. And so from a color standpoint, Lager Road is this bright, vibrant yellow, Staycation's green, Stowaway is black with the skull and crossbones and this iconic image that people know and love about Baxter. So Coastal Haze, I knew I wanted purple, and so the team knew like we wanted purple. And then all of a sudden, one of our staff members sent me a picture from this morning sunrise of this beautiful, orange is our brand color, this beautiful orange sun going into this purple sky, and I was like, that's it. And so we sent that to the design team, and that's how Coastal Haze. We'd never done a gradient look on the can, so that was our approach to try that. So, long story short, I could tell you the story of every single one.
That would make a great podcast.
But it really is different, and it's different for everything that we're doing. Coastal Storm came from trying to marry Coastal Haze and Ice Storm of 98 and put them together in a double IPA, and so we wanted this very ominous, tragic look and feel of people being like, what is this, So yeah, I guess that a lot of different ways. It was really important to me for consistency and cohesiveness for the brand name to be recognizable. It was something that we had, over the years, developed far too much of an individual story for each can. And as the market grew, bartenders don't have the time to bar managers, bartenders, whoever you're talking to, don't have the time to listen to a 15-minute spiel on why a beer was created. So we wanted to make sure that people could find it. If they loved Staycation Land out at a bar, when you went and shopped Baxter, that the retailers, the off-premise retailers, were really encouraged to put all of our brands together. So I know my friend doesn't like IPAs, but they like lagers. So the ridge line on our cans are from Baxter Peak to Pomola Peak on Katahdin, to try to give a nod to where we came from. We're proud of where we came from. We're proud of the reasoning for the name, but it was really time for us to rebrand. We just didn't know that the global pandemic was coming, so
Timing.
yeah.
Timing on that. Who knew?
Yeah.
So I have a suggestion for everyone. When you leave, we send you a survey about today. So, and then the last question I think is there anything else you'd like to tell us? So if you have suggestions for names for Jenn, just put them right there. Let's see what you got.
If you ever want to search a name, if you think that it's I've got a name, it's killer, go to Beer Advocate, put in the name, and then you can see all of the people that might sue you if you use that name. So
yeah, okay, so test them first.
Yeah.
Beer Advocate, great. Okay, so a couple questions about the beer scene in Maine. With so many craft brewers now in Greater Portland, how do you differentiate your brand? And then this is from, so answer that one. Yeah,
okay. I mean, it's not that Portland's not our competition. But we don't really spend time talking about what's going on in Portland. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a space here in Portland. We don't have a tasting room. So it's great. I mean, you have 45 breweries within a 5-mile radius of Portland. And of course, from a safety standpoint, we want people to come here for craft beer, and I get why Lewiston feels far away or Freeport might feel far away. but it's the engagement of there's a lot of great beer being made outside of Portland as well. So what do we have to do to draw people to those other points of the state, and how do we be part of that mission and messaging in a way that's impactful? As far as how to compete within Portland, what Baxter had done historically was we released a beer, and then that beer was the solution. We had to go sell a porter in every market that we had. Through COVID, really leaned into this idea of what my Southern Maine sales rep sells and capitalizes on is very different than what the Northern Maine territory likes. Even our lagers. Staycation Land is our number 2 draft SKU in Southern Maine, and Nappy, our distributors, we were in the top 5 always with Staycation Land. It's a great light lager. Lager Road is our Northern Maine reps' best-selling lager. So there's just a difference of the clientele. All of the specialty beers we release, there's 15 bars in Portland that are only gonna take a specialty from Baxter. They're not gonna put Stowaway on. So it's leaning into and rather than forcing and pushing what we're trying to sell, it's the idea of what can we solve for? Mm-hmm. If they need a dark beer, if they need a tropical, if they need the Oktoberfest was a really big hit. So we don't talk a whole lot on how to be relevant within Portland. What we're doing is very different than what a lot of folks are doing in Portland. They have a lot of foot traffic. Their tasting room is a smaller space, and it's great, but that differentiation, I think, for us is we have this huge, beautiful space within an old textile mill. I can't pretend that our story is different. We have to be true and authentic to who we are, and the economically friendly part of our brand is important. It's important to me that my dad could switch from Mick Ultra to Staycation Land. That was a big win in the Lever household, not opening up and seeing the Mick Ultra. So, it's not to discredit anything that they're doing, but we really just focus on how do we keep improving on what we offer and our releases.
So let's talk about you, Jenn, as a leader. So what are the principles that drive you as a leader?
I think it's probably most important to me that my team knows that there's nothing I would ask them to do that I wouldn't be willing to do. I definitely want to put people first. I think if you can't support what people do and have outside of work, whether that be family or friends or softball leagues or whatever their interests are that make working worth it, then they can't see the ability to work there long term. And that's really, really critical. As far as within work, I'm always going to be pushing and challenging and the next thing, but the enthusiasm that the team has around that, and typically craft beer industry employs really competitive, hardworking people as well. There's a lot of labor, like literal physical labor, goes into making sure that you're enjoying that product. And so if I can do something if we can invest in something that makes their job just a little bit easier, I can't change the weather, I can't change how good a textile mill is at holding the heat in, but I can understand that that's an implication of the building that we're in and try to make that working condition as best as possible.
Do you get sick of the question, what's it like to be a woman in a male-dominated industry?
I don't, and there's probably maybe someone in the audience or some coach out there that can tell me how I'm supposed to answer this, but I just think it's a really difficult question to ask me how it is to be a woman in the industry when there's so many women that have come before me. There's so many women that serve in completely different roles. It's different for a woman brewer than it is as a woman CEO or a woman in marketing or a woman in the pub. And while we all have being a woman in common, our experiences are different. Your tenure, your age, where you are in the state, where you are in different states is always going to be different. So it feels rude of me to assume that I could make a statement about how it is to be a woman in the industry. I can tell you how it is to be me in the industry, not coming from a beer background and that the insecurity of that and how that was taken and to the positive and the negative. But I also understand that I have a responsibility to speak up for women in the industry given my role. So I never want to short credit that. But I think it's difficult to surmise that. Yeah. And often people are looking for really synthesized, like, check the box. Okay, I've asked about being a woman, and now I understand what it is to be a woman, which I can't summarize very quickly. So,
All right, so I'm going to ask you the same question with a twist
Yeah.
on it. And this is from Mallory Brook, meteorologist. What's the best advice to female entrepreneurs or leaders to be successful in a male-dominated field?
Again, I think the things that have made me successful in different male-dominated fields are different depending on the industry. But I think it's important to find allies, to find people that you can ask that uncomfortable question to that really you do trust. And of course, you make mistakes along the way, and you trust people that maybe aren't the right person, because your gauge on the ability to trust at 22 is probably different at 36, or at least it should be. But understanding, like, looking at perspectives or issues from a gender neutral standpoint, and the assumption, don't assume that it's because you're a woman something did or didn't happen, but don't allow things to happen that because I'm a woman I have to handle this, I have to deal with this. I think that guttural check and that inner dialogue is really important, especially early in your career, because you don't want to be labeled as someone who cries wolf or makes a bigger situation out of something that's small, but you don't want to allow people to treat you in a way that's not fair, that they wouldn't treat others. So I can only speak to the way that I handled that myself in the early time at Pepsi, and I gained the relationships and the respect of my counterparts, particularly my colleagues, by behaving in a way that I wanted to be known for. I looked to people within the company that I wanted to emulate, that I looked at the way managers that I had made people feel, the way that they listened, the way that they responded, their follow through, their follow up. I wanted to be an asset for the company. And that's really what I focused on initially. And then as I gained that respect, I was able to address issues in a deeper way, more one-on-one with folks when they stepped out of line or they said something or did something that I wasn't as comfortable with. I often found a lot of success in knowing their personal lives, knowing what they had kids, they had a daughter, they loved their wives. Like, how would you feel if somebody said that to your wife, if somebody said that to your mother? Unfortunately, fortunately, we live in a very individualistic country, so making it relate to people in a way that matters to them, I have found in my career to be more impactful than trying to make someone feel badly about something maybe they don't know as being insulting.
Right.
I think the movement for females and being better reflected within each industry is there, but we have a really long way to go. So I think you've got to be as forgiving to yourself as you are to the people around you, and understand you're going to make mistakes along the way, and hopefully you learn from them and it gets easier over time.
Yeah, now one of the things that, a quote that drives you is, be comfortable being uncomfortable. So give some examples when you've been really uncomfortable. Or just one.
Yeah, so I heard that first at a leadership conference at Pepsi. And the idea was, like, once you're comfortable in a role, you're not challenging yourself. So Pepsi has a really great principle, or they did at the time, a great principle where you had to lap your own results. And because if you can't grow on what you've improved, you haven't really shown if you've made sustainable change. And so the intention of that quote in that context was, once you're comfortable and it's kind of breezy and you've locked it in, like you're probably already behind looking for that next role. I do think it's important early in your career to not be thinking 3 steps ahead. If you're not performing in your current role, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we have with young folks coming on. They're more worried about what they're going to be and what they're going to do at 30 before they've executed what they're doing at 22. So I focused a lot on what I was currently in, but I wanted to be challenged. I knew I was the only candidate with a sociology and economics degree from a liberal arts school in the entire country at that particular for 2008, and everybody was engineers. So trying to justify that, like, I'm not an engineer. I can't make up what I don't have. And so I had to lean into what I did know and be very comfortable admitting what I don't know. And as women leaders, even at a young age, you know, you're supposed to have confidence, you're supposed to feel a certain way and have answers. And I think that vulnerability is uncomfortable, and it's something that I've leaned into over the course of my career, when it's not the most convenient thing that, like, I don't know what you're talking about, I need you to explain it. And being willing to say that.
We are quickly running out of time. I feel like we need to do a part 2 on this because we have so many questions. But I have so many great questions still to answer. But I wanted to give the audience an opportunity if there are any questions.
I enjoyed your talk almost as much as I enjoy your beer. Are there any laws on the books in the state that the brewing industry considers unfair and that you would like to change?
Oh, great question.
Okay. Oh, that is a great question. So I am the vice president of the Maine Brewers Guild board, and from the board position, I would say that we don't have any formal position on that question, which I'm learning how to answer those type of questions. From a just purely Baxter-related functional law, I would love to see an improvement on the way the state of Maine handles labeling. So if we have a label that's federally approved, everyone has gone through staffing issues, including label commissions at both the federal level and the state level. If something is federally approved and I can ship it to Virginia and Massachusetts and Florida, if the state of Maine would allow that label to just be able to be printed and sold in Maine, it would save an incredible amount of time, money, duress, and et cetera, from Maine state brewers, and particularly for Baxter. Because we are out of state, the timeline can go from 4 days of approval to 24. And when you make a commitment to a distributor that you're gonna have this beer on X date, it can interrupt your design time, it can make you move forward with a label that maybe you weren't ready for, it can make you delay a release of a beer based on it being approved. So I think that would be the one thing that I would say.
Oh.
So if anybody's in Bablo and wants to just get that across.
We probably have time for one more question. Anyone got a question? Oh, in the back, Ricky.
Any other women-led breweries, and you all connect at all in any way, or not?
There's several women. Heather Sanborn of Rising Tide is a business. You know, her and her husband run the company together. Pam Powers of Bigelow Brewing. Elizabeth Johnson from Lake St. George. I'm not going to be able to list them all, and so I certainly feel terrible about that. But I mean, those are 3 people that have been in the industry much longer than I have. Whether their role or title is exactly the same, or but no, we don't have necessarily like a commission of women-led breweries. That, you know, we have certainly, we've got the Pink Boot Society, which is all women in the industry regardless of your role, and then several people from our Maine Brewers Guild board of electives are half women, and that wasn't on purpose. It was just people ran, and Kelsey Vandermoon from Vanderbrew in Winthrop, Colleen from Maine Beer Company, Heather Sanborn, and myself are all on the board.
Wow, good representation. So seriously, I maybe got to 40% of the questions. So we may have to do something online or something, and we will share it with all of you. But when you go home at the end of the day, how do you know it was a great day? What happened?
So we have this tradition at Baxter about champagne. So long before I was with Baxter, I've always loved champagne because of the celebratory nature of champagne. You don't have a terrible day, and you know you're talking to your friend and they say, I'm gonna pop into this Prosecco. It was a terrible day. So the mindset that people drink champagne is in a celebratory nature. So when I came into Baxter, there was a $3.7 million hop issue. So I started to bring my tradition of loving champagne to Baxter, that we would pop champagne and have a little bit of Andre. So not the expensive stuff, but to celebrate and just to recognize. I think milestones are important. And so over the years and my tenure as president, it's transitioned to our kitchen at the brewery is lined, there's shelves that are lined with champagne bottles, and everyone has their name on one champagne bottle with a goal. And once they hit the goal goes into the fridge, and then at the staff meetings, they tell what their goal is, how they accomplished it, and then we all celebrate the champagne together. So the champagne days are particularly good for me, knowing when they hit them, when we had them. But the way that the team looks at that as a way of being really proud of their individual contribution, what it means for the greater team. So I would say champagne days are probably my favorite days, not just for the consumption,
How
but
ironic, right?
yeah.
Great. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being here. I know you're going to be at the Maine Women's Conference. Is that next week?
Next Wednesday, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is Jen's like speaking score. But I'm going to save those questions for you, and we're going to tackle them. You're impressive. We are so thankful for everything that Baxter does for our community and getting the visibility for Maine. Thank you for boomeranging back here.
My pleasure.
You have already accomplished so much, but we all see big things for you ahead in the future. So
Thank you very much.
thank you all. And thank you to Rue for hosting. This is just such a fun, energetic space and so much potential for partnership with Maine businesses. So,
Yeah.
Have a good day.